Hi, my name is Liam Fairfax, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about autoimmune diseases and how they affect the body, specifically the hypothalamus. So, the first disease I'm going to talk about is ALS, which is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And it is a motor neuron disease, so the neurons break down and die, as well as the disease is likely to be caused by gene mutation, chemical imbalance, disorganized immune system, and as well as the disease is inherited in 5 to 10% of the population. Now, one of the main symptoms of this disease is hypothalamic atrophy, which is the wasting away or shrinking or degradation of the hypothalamus. So, obviously, the hypothalamus cannot function properly. And in a study by Georges or Jorge's, however you want to pronounce it, and colleagues, he took four different people who were at four separate stages in their battle with ALS and measured the amount of hypothalamic atrophy in the amongst the four categories to figure out more and more information about this symptom. So what they took was 251 people with sporadic ALS, took 19 people who were symptomatic ALS mutation carriers, 32 people who were pre-symptomatic ALS mutation carriers, as well as 112 healthy people. And what they were able to conclude from their results is that the 112 healthy people were the only category that did not display hypothalamic atrophy, which, as you can assume, was kind of a given. The second thing that they were discovered was that the only difference between the severe atrophy in the sporadic and symptomatic carriers and the pre-symptomatic carriers was that the pre-symptomatic carriers did not display a loss in volume in the hypothalamus, whereas there was a loss in volume in the hypothalamus with sporadic ALS carriers as well as the symptomatic carriers. So what they were able to conclude from that was that this is related to early onset of the disease. So if you are able to know that you have ALS and you are a pre-symptomatic carrier, you can be beginning to get treatment earlier and try to combat some of the disorders with ALS as well as the hypothalamic atrophy. Now, moving on to our second disease is cystic fibrosis, and this is caused by the mutated CFTR gene, which is the cystic fibrosis transmembrane conductase regulator. And this gene is expressed in the hypothalamus, but in a study by NIU and colleagues using a lot of staining techniques, they wanted to figure out exactly where the CFTR gene was expressed in the hypothalamus. So what they were able to conclude was that with the CFTR gene, it is prominent in glial and ganglion cells to the point where it is ubiquitous even. And the article later went on to conclude that the CFTR gene contributes to maintaining the structure and function of ganglion cells. And the function of these ganglion cells is to house afferent and efferent nerves, which send signals to and from to the brain and to the body and vice versa, so that they could perform bodily functions. So with that being disrupted in cystic fibrosis, you get the inability to, you get the muscle pains and the inability to gain weight and all the other symptoms of these diseases that I will get into with my conclusion. Now, in a study done by Pauline Veracruz and colleagues, she looked at hypothalamus, the hypothalamic function and how it relates to disorders like Alzheimer's and Huntington's disease, and a few other these diseases in the category of neurodegenerative disorders. ALS is in that category. Cystic fibrosis is not. So basically, in Alzheimer's, it is basically, partly due to the disruption of the phagocytotic properties of glial cells, which, as we learned in this class, are the microglia. So the disruptions of the microglia lead to neuroinflammation, alpha and beta protein overload, and accumulation and formation of plaques. And the presence of these factors leads to hypothalamic atrophy, or the weakening and wasting away of the cells, or the hypothalamus that I talked about in my first disorder, ALS. And in a study by Callan and colleagues in 2001 and Los Kuftova and colleagues in 2010, they reported that the hypothalamus volume decreased between 10 and 12% in patients with Alzheimer's. Now, in Huntington's disease, which is my fourth and final disease, it is due to the neuronal loss and atrophy of the striatum of the basal ganglia. Now, the striatum portion of the basal ganglia is for facilitating voluntary movement, which makes sense as to why there is a cognitive decline in Huntington's disease, as well as psychiatric symptoms and sleep problems, as well as metabolic alterations. Now, basically, to conclude everything that I've just thrown at you guys, is that the hypothalamus basically it regulates a lot of body functions, from reproduction, food intake or energy expenditure, control of the circadian cycle, as well as the sleep-wake cycle. And a lot of the functions in the hypothalamus can be directly correlated to symptoms in the diseases that I have mentioned. For example, the sleep-wake cycle is a function of the hypothalamus, and sleep problems are present in Huntington's disease, as well as food intake and energy expenditure are functions of the hypothalamus, and there are metabolic alterations in Alzheimer's and ALS, as well as there's the inability to gain weight in cystic fibrosis. So basically, what I'm trying to get at, along with the cognitive impairment that is present in all of these diseases, that has to do with the hypothalamus and the brain functioning as a whole, as well as the hypothalamic atrophy, which is the wasting away of the hypothalamus, which leads to the cognitive impairment and the cognitive decline. So basically, to summarize in one sentence, what I'm trying to say is that there's a direct correlation between the symptoms of these autoimmune diseases and neurodegenerative disorders and the function of the hypothalamus. So disrupting the function of the hypothalamus is a much greater problem than just going to, you can't just go to the doctor and get a pill, or just do this and you'll be fine. Disrupting the function of the hypothalamus leads to chronic illness and can lead to a disease being with you for the rest of your life, and the functions of the hypothalamus will then correlate to your symptoms. So that is all I have. Thank you guys for your time.